Rancher decided to watch his housekeeper after work, but saw something he didn't expect. Richard Thompson watched from the window of the main house as his housekeeper finished tidying the kitchen. For 3 months, something about that woman had deeply unsettled him, but he couldn't quite put his finger on what exactly made him suspicious. That's when he noticed she always hurried out right after work, carrying an old leather bag she never let go of. Every time he asked about her day, Margaret would avoid his gaze and give vague answers. That afternoon, he decided he would uncover what she was hiding. Margaret Wilson wiped her hands on her apron one last time and grabbed her bag. Richard hid behind the porch door, watching her walk down the dusty road leading to downtown Milltown. The sunset painted the sky orange, and he kept a safe distance as he followed her. The woman in her early 40s walked briskly, but stopped occasionally to glance around as if afraid of being seen. Richard's heart raced. What was she hiding? Was she stealing supplies from the ranch, or worse, passing information about his property to potential intruders? Margaret stopped at a deserted crossroads, far from the prying eyes of town. Richard hid behind an old wooden gate, observing her every move. To his surprise, she knelt on the dry ground and began digging with her bare hands, dirtying the simple dress she wore. From the shallow hole, she pulled out a small rusty tin she had hidden under some rocks. Richard watched, stunned, as she opened the container and pulled out several crumpled bills. It was old money, carefully saved. She counted each bill meticulously, dividing them into 3 equal stacks. The rancher immediately recognized the amount. It was exactly the salary he had paid her for months. Every penny she had earned working in his home was there, stashed in that makeshift hiding spot. But why didn't she keep the money at home? And why divide it into 3 parts? Margaret placed each stack of money into separate envelopes, tucked 2 into her bag and held one in her hands. She buried the empty tin again and stood up, brushing the dirt off her dress. Richard followed her once more, now more intrigued than suspicious. The first stop was a small house on the outskirts of Milltown, where an elderly woman waited by the window. Richard hid behind a tree and watched Margaret hand over the first envelope. The 2 women embraced for a long time, and the older one cried with emotion upon receiving the money. Richard recognized the woman at the window. It was Mrs. Jenkins, the former cook at his ranch whom he had fired 2 years ago. She had fallen seriously ill and could no longer work as efficiently. He had dismissed her without a second thought about her situation. Now he discovered Margaret was supporting her with her own salary. Guilt began to weigh on his chest. Margaret continued to her second stop, an even humbler house where 3 children ran to greet her, shouting, "Aunt Margaret!" She handed out bread she had hidden in her bag and gave the second envelope to a young woman who looked exhausted. Richard moved close enough to hear their conversation. The young woman thanked her with tears in her eyes, saying that without that help, she wouldn't be able to keep the children in school. Margaret reassured her, saying that as long as she had work, they would never go without. It was a family she had taken in as her own. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing, Richard's heart grew heavier by the minute. He was beginning to realize how little he knew about the woman who had worked in his home for 3 years. Margaret walked to her third and final destination, making her way through the dark streets until she reached the small town cemetery. She moved slowly among the graves until she stopped before a simple, unadorned tombstone. There, she placed the last envelope along with some wildflowers she had gathered along the way. Kneeling before the headstone, she began speaking softly, as if someone could hear her. Richard approached cautiously, hidden behind a larger mausoleum. He could read the name on the headstone, Michael Wilson, beloved son. The date showed the boy had been only 12 when he passed, 5 years earlier. Margaret spoke to the grave, telling it about her work, the people she helped, and asking for strength to carry on. "Mikey, my boy, Mama brought your usual little money. I know you don't need anything anymore, but it's my way of showing I'll never forget you," she whispered, stroking the cold stone. "Mrs. Jenkins is doing better, you know. And Aunt Sarah's children are growing up strong. You'd be so proud to see how Mama manages to help everyone." Richard's legs felt weak. The woman he had suspected of stealing had, in truth, been sharing every penny of her wages to help others and honor her son's memory. He stepped away silently, his heart heavy with remorse and admiration. The next day, Margaret arrived for work at her usual time, wearing the same quiet smile as always. Richard watched her differently now, noticing details that had once escaped him. The calloused hands from hard work, the dress always clean but mended in places, the worn but well-kept shoes. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she greeted him, as she did every day. "Good morning, Margaret," he replied, fighting the urge to confess what he had discovered. Instead, he chose to act quietly. "Listen, I've been thinking, and you deserve a raise. You've been an exemplary worker." Margaret stopped setting the table and looked at him in surprise. Tears welled in her eyes, but she tried to hide them, quickly wiping them away with her apron. "You don't have to, Mr. Thompson. You already pay me well. I insist, starting today, your wages will be double what you've been receiving." She couldn't hold back her emotions and wept openly, thanking him over and over. Richard felt a mix of satisfaction and guilt, satisfaction for being able to help her, guilt for taking so long to recognize her worth. In the weeks that followed, Richard noticed Margaret kept the same routine. Even with higher pay, she still hurried off after work with her leather bag. Curiosity led him to follow her again, where he discovered she was now able to help more people and leave more money at her son's grave. Determined to understand her family's story better, Richard went to the town records to investigate Margaret's past. What he found shook him even more. Michael Wilson had fallen seriously ill at 10, and she had spent all her savings on treatments in New York City. Margaret's former boss, a local merchant, had fired her for missing work to care for her sick son. With no options left, she had taken whatever work she could find, which was when Richard had hired her, paying less than half what her labor was worth. The guilt gnawed at him, especially when he remembered all the times he had complained about her small delays or distractions. Now he understood she had been fighting through her own grief, just to keep working and supporting others. The dignity of this woman both awed and shamed him. On a rainy Monday morning, Margaret arrived soaked and clearly feverish. She insisted on working, even as Richard tried to send her home to rest. That was when he found an old bag full of wet papers lying on the floor near the kitchen table. Richard hesitated, but concern won out. He opened the bag and found dozens of yellowed medical receipts, all related to Michael Wilson's treatment. Even after 5 years, she was still paying off debts tied to her son's care. The last receipt was for a bill due at the end of the month. He cried alone in his office, remembering his own son lost in an accident years before. The pain of losing a child was something one never fully overcame, but Margaret had transformed her grief into love for others. While he had shut himself away in the isolation of the ranch, she had opened her heart to care for those in need. Determined to help her without hurting her pride, Richard began creating extra paid tasks. He asked her to organize the house library, embroider tablecloths, and tend to an herb garden he claimed he needed. Margaret accepted each extra job with gratitude, unaware they were excuses to give her more money. The extra income allowed her to settle the old medical debts and even increase the help she gave to Mrs. Jenkins and the children's family. Richard watched from afar, feeling a satisfaction he hadn't known in years. Helping someone so deserving made him feel useful again. 3 months later, on the 5th anniversary of Michael's passing, Richard found Margaret silently crying in the kitchen as she prepared lunch. She tried to hide it when he appeared, but the tears were impossible to conceal. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thompson. I shouldn't be like this while working." "Margaret, we all have our hard moments. Do you want to talk about what's wrong?" She hesitated, but the genuine kindness in his eyes encouraged her. She spoke about Michael, how he was a smart and loving boy, about his dreams of studying to become a teacher. She told of his final days, when he apologized for causing his mother so much trouble. "He had nothing to apologize for," she said between sobs. "He was my son, my responsibility to care for him. But sometimes I wonder if I did everything I could, if I couldn't have done something differently." Without thinking, Richard stepped closer and hugged her. It was the first time in years he had shown genuine affection to another person. Margaret broke down in tears, releasing pain she had held onto for so long. "I lost a son too," Richard revealed. "William was 16 when the accident happened. I know this pain that never fully goes away." They talked for hours that afternoon. Margaret shared more stories about Michael, and Richard reminisced about William. They realized they had each dealt with grief differently. She by caring for others, he by isolating himself. There, an unexpected bond formed between boss and housekeeper. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. In the weeks that followed, Margaret fell seriously ill. The flu she caught in the rain turned into pneumonia, leaving her bedridden for 15 days. Richard insisted she stay in the main house to recover properly. During that time, he cared for her with the same devotion she had shown others. As Margaret rested, Richard learned more about her life. She kept a small photo of Michael always in her blouse pocket, close to her heart. During her high fever, she spoke to the boy as if he were there. Richard realized she carried her son in her heart wherever she went. During her recovery, Margaret shared more stories about Michael. How curious he was about everything, how he helped his struggling classmates at school, how he dreamed of having a big library to read all the books in the world. Richard listened to every word, seeing in the sparkle of her eyes the infinite love of a mother. "You know, Mr. Thompson, sometimes I dream that Michael is watching me and feels proud when I help someone. Hey, it's silly, I know, but it gives me strength to keep going." "It's not silly, Margaret. I'm sure he'd be very proud of the mother you are. You've turned your pain into love for others. That's very rare." It was in that moment Richard had an idea. The ranch had a large room he used for storage, full of old, useless things. Why not turn it into a community library in memory of both their sons? A place where underprivileged children could study and dream, just as Michael would have wanted. When he proposed the idea to Margaret, she was speechless. Tears of emotion streamed down her face, and she needed a few minutes to find her words. The thought of honoring Michael's memory by helping other children achieve their dreams was more than she could have imagined. "Are you sure, Mr. Thompson? It would be such an honor." "I'm certain. Let's create something beautiful together. A library where your Michael and my William will live on through the good we do." They spent the following weeks planning every detail. Richard hired masons to renovate the room, while Margaret researched age-appropriate books. Word spread through Milltown, and many people offered to donate books and help with organizing. Mrs. Jenkins, despite her limitations, insisted on sewing cushions for the reading chairs. The family of the 3 children Margaret had helped volunteered to paint the walls with colorful drawings. The entire community came together to make the project a reality. During the preparations, Richard and Margaret worked side by side, and he noticed her natural talent for working with children. When the first books arrived, she arranged them with special care as if each one were a treasure. Richard saw in her a born educator who had never had the chance to develop that gift. The first child to visit the still under construction library was a 12-year-old boy, the same age Michael had been when he passed. His name was Danny, an orphan who lived with his grandmother in a humble home on the outskirts of Milltown. Margaret welcomed him with particular attention, seeing in him a shadow of her own son. Danny struggled with reading, having missed much of school while caring for his sick grandmother. Margaret offered to teach him, using the endless patience she had developed while caring for Michael. Every afternoon after finishing her work at the ranch, she spent 2 hours helping Danny learn to read. Watching Margaret teach Danny deepened Richard's admiration for her. The way she explained letters and words, celebrated every small progress, and never showed impatience when he made mistakes. She was a natural teacher, driven by her love for children. Danny progressed quickly. Within months, he could read short texts on his own. Margaret cried with emotion every time she saw him reading effortlessly, something that had once seemed impossible. It was as if she were watching Michael fulfill a dream through another child. Other children began visiting the library even before its official opening. Margaret welcomed them all with the same warmth, identifying each one's specific needs. Some needed help with math, others with writing, and some just needed a quiet place to study. Richard watched it all with growing pride. This woman he had once distrusted was turning his property into a beacon of hope for dozens of families. The library had become much more than a book repository. It was a place where dreams were reborn. One afternoon, Richard found Margaret talking to an inconsolable 8-year-old girl. The child had recently lost her mother and felt lost in the world. Margaret hugged her tenderly, whispering words of comfort that only someone who had experienced the pain of loss could offer. "I know how much it hurts, sweetheart. I lost someone very special too. But your mother lives on in your heart, and she wants you to be happy and study hard." Richard realized Margaret wasn't just teaching children to read and write. She was teaching them how to cope with pain, to turn suffering into strength, to find purpose even in the hardest times. It was a lesson she had learned firsthand. As the library took shape, the relationship between Richard and Margaret also transformed. They were no longer just boss and housekeeper, but partners in a shared mission. He began to value her not just for her housework, but for the extraordinary person she was. Margaret, in turn, saw in Richard a kindness hidden beneath years of isolation and bitterness. The man who had once hired her for low pay was now fully devoted to a project that would bring him no financial return. His transformation inspired her as much as she inspired him. The library's grand opening was set for a sunny Saturday in October. The whole community attended, including local authorities who were impressed by the initiative. Richard gave an emotional speech, revealing how he had discovered Margaret's true character. "I confess to everyone here that I once doubted this extraordinary woman," he said, pointing to Margaret. "I even followed her, thinking she was hiding something bad. But I found out she was hiding something wonderful, a heart bigger than any material wealth." Margaret blushed with embarrassment and emotion as Richard publicly acknowledged her generosity. The community gave her a standing ovation, recognizing her as a quiet hero who had always been among them. Many hadn't even known how much she helped other families. "Margaret taught me that the greatest treasures are the ones we share," Richard continued. "This library exists because a mother turned her pain into love for other people's children. I publicly apologize for doubting her and thank her for showing me the true meaning of kindness." Margaret stepped up to the microphone with tears in her eyes. Her voice trembled as she began to speak. "Mr. Thompson gave me more than a job. He gave me purpose when I needed it most. After I lost my Michael, I thought my life had no meaning left. But I found I could honor his memory by caring for other children. This library is his dream coming true through all of you." The first child to officially use the library was Danny, the boy Margaret had taught to read. He chose an adventure book and sat in a colorful armchair, reading aloud for everyone to hear. It was a magical moment, symbolizing the rebirth of hope. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. In the following months, the library became the heart of the community. Children of all ages came to study, do homework, and join reading circles organized by Margaret. She devoted herself entirely to the project, creating educational activities that involved the whole family. Richard officially named her the library's educational coordinator, with a salary matching the responsibility. Margaret accepted tearfully, realizing she had finally found her true calling. Working in education filled a void in her heart she hadn't even known existed. Margaret's transformation was visible. The smile that was once discreet now lit up her entire face. She spoke passionately about each child's progress, every new book that arrived, and every family benefiting from the project. Richard saw in her a fulfilled woman, not just surviving, but thriving. A year after the opening, the library was serving over 50 children regularly. Margaret had created a sponsorship system where wealthier families in the area funded school supplies for underprivileged children. The project had grown beyond all expectations. Mrs. Jenkins, now recovered and receiving proper treatment discreetly paid for by Richard, had returned as a volunteer at the library. She prepared healthy snacks for the children and told old stories that enchanted everyone. It was beautiful to see 3 generations working together toward a common goal. The 3 children Margaret had helped from the beginning became examples of resilience. The oldest earned a scholarship to a private school in New York City, the middle one excelled in math, and the youngest discovered a talent for drawing. They all continued visiting the library, now as mentors to other children. Danny, Margaret's first student, had become a voracious reader. At 13, he had already read more books than many adults. He dreamed of becoming a writer and spent his free time crafting stories inspired by the library's children. Margaret treasured each of his writings like they were precious gems. One December afternoon, on the eve of the library's second anniversary, Margaret was organizing books when she found a letter tucked between the pages of a poetry book. It was from Danny, written months earlier, but never delivered out of shyness. "Aunt Margaret, I wanted you to know you changed my life. Before I met you, I couldn't even write my name properly. Now I dream of writing books that other children will read in this library. You're like a mother to all of us here. I hope one day I can repay everything you've done for me. With love, Danny." Margaret wept as she read the letter. It was the greatest recognition she could receive for her work. She tucked the paper into the same place where she once kept Michael's photo, realizing she now had dozens of children of the heart to love and protect. Richard, noticing her emotion, approached curiously. When Margaret showed him the letter, he was moved too. Those 2 years of working together had transformed not just the community, but most of all themselves. Two hearts wounded by loss had found healing in caring for others. The library had become a model for other towns in the region. Delegations visited regularly to learn how to replicate the project. Margaret welcomed them with pride, explaining that the secret lay in genuine love for the children, not just material resources. During these visits, Richard always made sure to highlight Margaret's crucial role in the project's success. He shared how he had discovered qualities in her that had remained hidden for years, how one person could transform an entire community when given the right opportunity and support. A special surprise came on the library's second anniversary. Families helped by the project secretly organized a tribute to Margaret and Richard. They created a mural with photos of every child who had passed through the library, accompanied by messages of gratitude. At the center of the mural was a plaque that read, "In memory of Michael Wilson and William Thompson, two angels who inspired this library through the love of two special people." It was a public acknowledgement that pain transformed into love could move mountains. Margaret couldn't stop crying as she looked at that mural. It was as if Michael were present in that moment, applauding everything she had managed to build in his memory. Richard also grew emotional, realizing that William would live on forever through the good they did together. That night, after all the guests had left, Margaret and Richard walked to Riverside Cemetery to visit the graves of Michael and William. It was a tradition they had created for the most important moments, sharing their victories with their departed sons. "Michael, my son, today was a very special day. Your library is helping so many children achieve their dreams. Mr. Thompson has become a dear friend, almost like a father to me. I know you'd be happy to hear that Mom isn't alone anymore." Richard also spoke to William, telling him about the transformation Margaret had brought into his life. How she taught him that pain could be turned into purpose, that helping others heals wounds that once seemed impossible to mend. 3 years had passed since that afternoon when Richard decided to follow Margaret. The library now served over 100 children and had become a statewide model for community education. Margaret had completed a correspondence teaching degree, formalizing the knowledge she already practiced so well. The transformation in both of them was complete. Richard, once a bitter and isolated man, had become one of the region's leading philanthropists. Margaret, who had once divided her meager salary to help others, now coordinated projects benefiting hundreds of families. Their relationship had deepened into a profound friendship, built on mutual respect and a shared mission. Richard came to see her as family, and Margaret found in him a trusted partner for her social projects. Together, they formed a powerful team for good. The library had grown so much that it needed its own building. Richard donated land in Milltown and constructed a modern facility, equipped with computers, a science lab, and an auditorium for events. Margaret oversaw every detail, ensuring it remained a welcoming space for all children. On the day of the new building's inauguration, there was a touching surprise. Danny, now 16, had written a book about his experience at the library, titled "The Teacher from the Heart." It told how Margaret had changed his life and the lives of dozens of other children. The first copy was presented to Margaret in an emotional ceremony. She could hardly believe that the boy who once struggled to write his own name was now a published author. It was the clearest proof that investing in children could transform an entire community's future. Danny had earned a full scholarship to a university in New York City to study journalism. His dream was to become a writer, and he already had several projects underway. During the book launch speech, he credited all his success to Margaret and the library. Aunt Margaret didn't just teach me how to read, she taught me how to dream. She showed me it doesn't matter where we come from, but where we want to go. This library saved my life, and so many other children's lives. It's a place where miracles happen every day. Other former library students were also thriving. Sarah, one of the first 3 children Margaret had helped, became a teacher and returned to work at the library. It was a beautiful full circle. Those who had received help were now helping others. The library also became a family support center. Margaret created mothers' groups where they shared experiences and received guidance on raising children. Richard funded vocational courses for parents, fostering the whole community's growth. Mrs. Jenkins, now 75, had become the children's most beloved librarian. She knew every book by heart and could tell exactly which story to recommend to each child. Her life experience uniquely enriched the library's activities. 5 years after that afternoon of discoveries, Richard and Margaret were at the cemetery, as they often were. But this time, something was different. On Michael's grave, alongside the envelope of money Margaret always left, there were dozens of drawings and letters from the children at the library. The kids had discovered Michael's story and, on their own, began leaving tributes for him. They saw him as an older brother they'd never met, but who was present through the love Margaret devoted to them. "Your Michael is watching over so many children now through his mother," a 7-year-old girl told Margaret. "My grandma said those who do good on earth become angels in heaven. Your Michael must be the angel of children who love to read." Margaret was deeply moved by these spontaneous displays of affection. Michael had become a local legend, an inspiration for children facing hardships. His memory lived on in every book read, every dream realized at the library. Richard also received regular tributes at William's grave. Families helped by the library's projects made sure to thank the boy who had inspired so much kindness through his father's grief. It was as if both sons were still alive, multiplied in hundreds of other children. A special event marked the library's 5th anniversary. Milltown declared Margaret an honorary citizen for her contributions to education. It was the first time someone born in another town had received such an honor, but everyone agreed she deserved it. During the ceremony, Margaret gave a heartfelt speech about how pain could be transformed into purpose. She spoke of Michael, of Richard, of all the children who had passed through the library. Her words were interrupted several times by the audience's emotional applause. "I've learned that no pain is useless when we turn it into love for others. My Michael left too soon, but through this library he lives on in every child who learns to read, in every dream that comes true. Death isn't the end when we plant seeds of kindness along the way." Richard was also honored as Benefactor of the Year by the City Council. In his speech, he shared the whole story of how he met Margaret, how initial distrust had turned into deep admiration. It was a touching account that left no dry eyes in the crowd. "I was a bitter man living in the past. Margaret taught me to live in the present and build the future. She showed me that helping others is the best way to honor those we've lost. This library exists because an extraordinary woman taught me the true meaning of life." The library now received visits from universities studying its community-led model. Margaret had become a national figure in grassroots education, speaking at conferences and seminars across the country. Her story inspired similar projects in hundreds of towns. Richard, meanwhile, devoted himself entirely to managing the resources needed to sustain and expand the project. He established a foundation to ensure the library's future even after he was gone, his way of preserving the legacy they had built together. The library's success also brought challenges. Demand grew so much that a waiting list for new students became necessary. Margaret trained new volunteer educators, spreading her teaching method rooted in love and patience. Many of the library's first students were now in college, but still returned to help the younger children. A beautiful tradition was born where every former student who graduated would return to teach what they had learned. The library became a true ecosystem of knowledge and solidarity. Danny, now a journalism graduate, created a blog documenting all the stories of triumph from the library. His writings were read by thousands and inspired new educational projects across the country. He became the official voice of the library in the digital world. One of the most touching stories Danny documented was Emily's, a girl who arrived at the library at 8 years old, mute from family trauma. Margaret worked with her for 2 years, using picture books and endless kindness to help her express herself. The day Emily spoke her first word at the library was celebrated like a miracle. Not only did Emily regain her voice, but she discovered a natural talent for public speaking. By 15, she was competing in oratory contests representing the library. Her dream was to become a lawyer to defend vulnerable children. Margaret followed each of her achievements with maternal pride. The library also became a research center for alternative education methods. Universities sent interns to learn Margaret's techniques for helping children with learning difficulties. She welcomed them all generously, sharing the knowledge she had gained through experience. 10 years had passed since that transformative afternoon. The library had multiplied into 5 branches across the region, all following the model Margaret created. Over 1,000 children had gone through the program, many now grown into professionals giving back to the community. Margaret, in her early 50s, had become an international reference in community education. She received invitations to implement similar projects abroad, but chose to stay in her town where it all began. Her mission was local, but her impact spread worldwide. Richard, now in his 70s, had passed the ranch's management to a nephew, dedicating himself fully to social projects. The property had also become an environmental education center, where library children learned about sustainability and preservation. The relationship between them had evolved into something beyond simple definition. They were no longer boss and housekeeper, nor just friends. They were partners in a life mission, 2 souls who found each other through pain and built something beautiful together. Richard considered her a sister, and Margaret saw him as both father and protector. On the library's 10th anniversary, a grand celebration was held with state and federal officials in attendance. The project had become a case study in public education policy. Margaret was awarded the state's highest educational honor. During the event, there was an emotional surprise secretly prepared by all the library's former students. They had made a documentary telling the story of Margaret and Richard, from that fateful afternoon to the transformation of hundreds of lives. The film was titled "The Secret That Changed Everything." The screening was a moment of deep emotion. Margaret and Richard relived their journey, from initial distrust to their life-changing partnership. Hearing testimonies from all the children they had helped, now successful adults, was the greatest gift they could receive. One of the most moving scenes was an interview with Mrs. Jenkins, now 80 years old. She recounted how Margaret had saved her from abandonment when she was let go from the ranch, how that monthly support allowed her to recover her health and dignity. At 80, she still volunteered at the library. Margaret taught me no one is alone in this world as long as good people exist. She gave me more than money, she gave me hope. Today I help other children because I learned from her that kindness multiplies when shared. The documentary also showed the library's economic impact on the region. The children's education raised the community's cultural level, attracted new investments, and drastically reduced youth violence rates. The social project had also become a regional development initiative. At the end of the screening, Margaret stepped onto the stage with tears in her eyes. Her voice trembled with emotion as she began speaking to the hundreds of people present. It all started with a secret I tried to hide. I hid my pain, my need to help others, my way of honoring my son. Mr. Thompson found me that day, but he didn't just uncover my secrets. He discovered my potential, my ability to make a difference. He gave me an opportunity when I needed it most. Richard also spoke, revealing once more how that afternoon completely changed his worldview. I followed Margaret thinking I'd uncover something bad. Instead, I found something wonderful. I discovered there are people who share the little they have, who turn pain into love, who see opportunity where others see only problems. Margaret taught me that looking at someone with suspicion can turn to admiration when we have the humility to admit our mistakes. The celebration ended with everyone singing the library's anthem, created by the students themselves years earlier. The lyrics spoke of dreams reborn, books that open doors, and love that multiplies hope. It was the musical essence of everything they had built together. That night, Margaret and Richard returned to the cemetery, as they did on every special occasion. But now they didn't just visit the graves of Michael and William. The cemetery had created a memorial garden where families honored loved ones through social initiatives. It was another project inspired by their story. Michael, my son, today marks a decade of hard work. Your library now has branches, has saved hundreds of children, and has changed an entire town. I know you're proud of your mother. And I know you're happy because I found in Mr. Thompson a partner for this mission. Richard also spoke to William, thanking him for the life lesson he learned through the pain of loss. Son, I've learned that our parting wasn't in vain if we can turn our longing into love for others. You live in every child I help, in every dream I make possible through this library. Margaret taught me that, and I'm grateful every day for crossing paths with her. They returned home in silence, each lost in thought. 10 years had passed in a blink, but they left lasting marks on the community. What began as an act of vigilance had become one of the most beautiful stories of redemption and social transformation in the region. The next day, Margaret woke early, as she always did. She prepared coffee and gathered materials for another day at the library. In her mid-50s, she still had the energy and enthusiasm of a young teacher. Each day brought new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference. Richard also kept to his routine of closely overseeing all the Foundation's projects. At 70, he felt more useful and fulfilled than at any other time in his life. The transformation he'd experienced proved it's never too late to start over and find purpose. The library continued growing and modernizing. Margaret embraced new technologies, creating digital platforms that allowed children to keep learning even from a distance. During the pandemic, she reinvented herself, keeping the project running through virtual classes and home deliveries of materials. The library's model had inspired a national network of similar projects. Margaret traveled regularly to train educators in other towns, always accompanied by some of her former students who had become multipliers of the methodology. It was rewarding to see the model spreading across the country. Danny, now a nationally recognized writer, had just released his third book on community education. All royalties were donated to expand the network of local libraries. He had become the leading advocate for the methodology created by Margaret, sharing her story with audiences all over the country. One Monday morning, 15 years after that transformative afternoon, Margaret was organizing the new books that had arrived when she felt a familiar presence behind her. She turned and saw Richard standing at the door, with the same admiring gaze he had developed for her over the years. "Good morning, Margaret. Ready for another day of changing lives?" "Always ready, Mr. Thompson. Some beautiful science books came in today. The children will love them." They worked together, organizing the library for another day of activities. It was a routine they had developed over the years, each knowing the other's role perfectly. Together they made the perfect team for the mission they had embraced. By 9 in the morning, the first children began to arrive. Margaret welcomed them with the same warmth as always, asking about their families, their studies, their dreams. Every child was special to her. Every story was unique and deserved individual attention. Richard watched everything from his office in the library, feeling the same pride as always. 15 years had passed, but the magic still happened every day. Children arrived shy and left confident, arrived hopeless and left full of dreams. During the midday break, Margaret and Richard sat in the library garden to have lunch together, as they always did. It was a moment to reflect on the day, plan the next activities, and express gratitude for what they had built. "You know, Margaret, sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I hadn't decided to follow you that afternoon," Richard said, watching the children play in the courtyard. "And I wonder what it would have been like if you hadn't had the courage to give me a chance, even after discovering my secrets," she replied with a smile. "I think some things are meant to happen, no matter the path they take to reach us. It was a deep reflection on how life's paths can intertwine in mysterious ways. An act of distrust had become the foundation of one of the most beautiful partnerships either of them could have imagined. Fate had played a good trick on them both. In the afternoon, Sarah arrived, the former student who had become a teacher and now worked at the library. She brought news about the progress of the children in her class, sharing small victories that filled Margaret's heart with pride. Seeing her former students become educators was the greatest reward she could have. Aunt Margaret, little Lily, read her first whole book by herself today. She cried with emotion, "Just like you taught me is normal when we realize we can do something that once seemed impossible." "That's wonderful, Sarah. Remember when you cried the day you read your first book? Now you're helping other children experience that same joy. It's the beautiful cycle of education coming full circle." Margaret kept in touch with every former student who had become an educator, guiding them to keep the focus on the human side of teaching. For her, more important than passing on knowledge was passing on love, hope, and confidence in one's own abilities. At the end of the day, after all the children had left, Margaret and Richard took a walk through the library's halls. It was a daily ritual where they observed every corner of the place that had become the center of their lives. Walls covered with children's drawings, shelves filled with well-worn books, posters with motivational quotes. 15 years and it feels like yesterday," said Margaret, stopping in front of a photo from the opening day. "Look how much younger we were, with fewer wrinkles and darker hair. But look also how our smiles were shyer back then. Today, we smile with our whole souls." It's true. We were two wounded people trying to find meaning in life. Now we're two fulfilled people who found a purpose greater than ourselves. Pain brought us here, but it was love that kept us going. They locked up the library and walked together to the bus stop where Margaret caught her ride home. Even after all these years, she insisted on keeping her independence, living in her modest house on the outskirts of Milltown. Richard respected her choice, understanding it was part of her dignity. "See you tomorrow, Margaret. Rest well. See you tomorrow, Mr. Thompson. Dream of all the books we'll organize tomorrow." It was a simple goodbye, but full of genuine affection. They had become chosen family, bound not by blood but by a shared mission that had transformed their lives and hundreds of others. Margaret arrived home and, as she did every night, picked up the photo of Michael she kept on the living room table. She told him about her day, the children who had made progress, the plans for the following week. It was her way of keeping her son present in her life. "Mikey, my love, today Lily read her first whole book. You'd like her. She's curious and bright, just like you were. Your library grows more beautiful every day, full of happy children learning and dreaming. I've found my place in the world, son." Richard also arrived home and went straight to his office, where he kept the photo of William. He recounted the day's activities, future projects, and the joy he felt seeing the positive impact of all they had built together. "William, my son, your father has learned to be happy again. Margaret taught me that helping others is the best way to honor your memory. Every child who learns to read a book, every dream realized in the library, is a tribute to you." Both slept peacefully, as they had every night for 15 years. The calm of those who know they're on the right path, who have found a purpose greater than their own pain, who turned loss into gains for an entire community. The next morning, it would all begin again. More children would arrive at the library. More dreams would be planted, more lives would be transformed. The cycle would continue endlessly, ensuring the legacy of Michael and William lived on through each new generation of readers. End of story. Now, tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave your honest thoughts in the comments. Do you believe Richard made the right choice by following Margaret that afternoon? We'd love to hear your opinion and your own experiences about how small gestures can change lives. Thank you so much for being here with us.